Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim. Thank you so much for asking. I hope the listeners are doing great as well. And this conversation is one that came together so nicely. I mean, the gentleman that we have on is a historian, and we love these historical crimes, and we've been following this New England serial killer rumor, this active serial killer that may or may not be perpetrating crimes in and about the states of New England, and that led us to our guest today, who brings to the table, arguably, the nation's first serial killer. So we love the historical aspect of this.
Very excited to introduce this conversation that we're about to have with Christopher Daley. And he's got a great website. It's called daleyhistory.com, and that's Daley, D-A-L-E-Y, like his last name. And he's got several presentations, Lance. He does lectures around New England. He's a former teacher, and he's from Massachusetts. You'll hear his accent. It's great. It kind of sounds like us a little bit. And so in this conversation, we speak about what he dubs New England's first serial killer, and it's about Franklin Evans and how he murdered 14-year-old Georgianna Lovering in September of 1872. A bit creepy, actually, the more you hear about Franklin Evans and the crimes he perpetrated and what else he may have done.
Chris brings a lot of these revelations to the conversation. He brings up H.H. Holmes and how people say that H.H. Holmes was the first serial killer in the nation. And while Evans was arrested for the murder of Georgianna Lovering in 1872, he had confessed to a murder in 1856, seemingly his first one. So that's the time frame that we're looking at in regards to Evans.
Right, and you have to wonder how many others there could have been in between or potentially even before. And it sounds like Franklin Evans traveled around a lot, was let into people's houses. Definitely possible that he's got many other victims out there.
Right, and he always presented himself in a way that was parasitic. He was a snake oil salesman, so people would come to him. So he would draw them in, right? And he was often going about as a preacher, so that was a way that he would be able to gain the trust of children.
Okay, everyone. Well, we hope you enjoy this conversation with Mr. Christopher Daley about maybe one of the first serial killers in New England, Franklin Evans. We're going to break quick for commercial here, and we're going to be right back with Mr. Christopher Daley. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Welcome to the podcast, Christopher Daley. Chris, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
So great to have you on the show. This topic that you're going to bring to the table is really fascinating to us because we've been covering this rumored New England serial killer active in the area, terror in New England storyline that's gripping the nation, apparently. And we're trying to go through all the details and figure out if this is something that we should actually be worried about. But you come with a more historical background, which we love. For anyone who doesn't know who you are, can you introduce yourself and a little bit about that background?
My name's Christopher Daley. I've been doing historical presentations for over 30 years now. I'm a former teacher. I just retired a little while ago, took an early retirement. I have a number of presentations I do. A number of them are true crime presentations. I've also written a book called Murder and Mayhem in Boston, and that has a couple different people in there that you could class as serial killers too. But one of my recent presentations is America's first serial killer, and that was Franklin Evans. And I wanted to say first serial killer because I'm sick of hearing about H.H. Holmes is America's first serial killer, and we could probably go back to the 1700s if you want to talk about that. There's been serial killers way before H.H. Holmes.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that because I do get a little irritated as well when people always bring up H.H. Holmes because, I mean, the book, Devil in the White City, was a fantastic book. I mean, It really introduced a lot of people to H.H. Holmes, and he does have that really dramatic, like cinematic style to him with his murder home. Yeah. So I get why people do it, but if you do a little digging, you can find out, like, that's probably not the case.
And as far as I can tell, Franklin Evans was probably the first. He admitted to starting in 1856, and he wasn't caught until 1873, but he only confessed to about two or three. If you know anything about serial killers, it doesn't work that way. So he probably had a lot more than what he was admitting to.
Right. And yeah, I think depending on the source, 2 or 3 is all it takes to be classified as a serial killer.
Exactly. But usually they're not spread over 20 or 30 years. So his type was small or young girls. And back then, if one went missing, it wasn't like they had the Amber Alert and everything back then. So it's really hard to track how many missing girls there were in the New England area. He was up in Canada too. So it's hard to really track. In some cases, he hid his victims. In some cases, he didn't.
And he didn't have a middle name, or he didn't use a middle name. And I feel like
Not
that's
that
going
I
to be...
found.
Yeah,
right.
I feel like that's going to be a prerequisite as well.
You
need
really.
to have like a middle
John
name.
Wayne Gacy, right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
H.H. Holmes. You need to do something with the first name.
And it's interesting to note, speaking about H.H. Holmes, he was from New Hampshire as well. Gilmington, New Hampshire. He started out in I was thinking today as we were leading into this, if he ever crossed paths in his early days with Franklin Evans, I wonder.
That's a wild concept to wrap your head around.
I hadn't considered that, but that is really interesting. Before we get too deep into this story, I'm just curious, where did you teach?
I taught at Silver Lake Regional in Kingston, Massachusetts. I taught history 25 years. After COVID hit, I came up to New Hampshire. I'm in New Hampshire right now. This was my summer home. Things just kind of changed. I don't know what it was. And we sold the house in Mass, and I thought my wife would stay up here and I'd commute up on the weekends, and that didn't work out too well. I thought I only had a few more years to go, so I took a little early retirement. It's great. I really enjoy what I'm doing now. I'm doing the lecturing full time now, and I'm having a blast.
That's great. We actually just talked to another gentleman who retired, and he's like, I work more than I have ever worked.
Yeah.
But it's the stuff that he wants to work on.
Right. I work on my projects, and my wife's like, when are you going to stop working? I don't see it as work. I love it.
That's
I can
awesome.
literally say that. My research, I love the research part. When it comes to writing, I did have my one book. I find that very difficult, but putting together presentations, I love doing that. And I love going out and talking to folks and getting that feedback from folks too.
And how many presentations do you give out there?
I'm looking at the list right now. It's about 18 now. And some I've canceled. I used to do one on the JFK assassination, but I found there are so many layers to that thing. And I was up about an hour and a half, and you can't shove it all in there. And everybody's got an opinion. You really have to give an objective presentation. So you're not like saying, oh, I believe the CIA. You just say, these are the theories. But I kind of stopped doing that because I just felt like I wasn't doing it justice, because there's just too much to put in an hour and a half hour presentation.
I know. And some people are so committed to the JFK assassination, and it's just so consuming. So you have to pull back, right, on these lectures that you give. Do you ever get too involved with it?
Some of them I've been doing for over 30 years. I don't know if you've ever heard about the Sacco Vanzetti case. That's something I've always felt passionate about. If you don't know about that, in 1920, there was a murder robbery down in South Braintree. Eventually, they arrested these two men, Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti. They were convicted on pretty shaky evidence, but the thing was, they were anarchists in the 1920s, and they were probably likely involved in bombings. And the current wisdom right now, I don't know. People go, do you think they were guilty? I'm like, no, I don't think they were, but I'm not sure. People are definitely sure that they weren't guilty. They were railroaded by the Massachusetts judicial system. And there's kind of shades of the Karen Reed trial in there. Is that being held in Dedham? Yeah, same courtroom.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
That was a worldwide phenomena. Eventually, they ended up being executed over in Charlestown State Prison. So when I first started giving it, it was in the early 90s, and there were still people alive that had something to do with it. But it's kind of fading out. I find a lot of people haven't heard about it now, but that's how I got started. I feel pretty passionate about that. That's something I know a lot about. Some of these other lectures I've put together, and I'm not an expert on them, but I know enough to talk about them.
Well, okay, we got to get you back on to discuss that, because anytime there's a subject that's you said that it's being forgotten about, we like to pull it out of
Right.
our crawl space, so to speak.
I think hopefully your listeners will Google that and find out who Sacco and Vanzetti were, because that's a big case. I also do talk on the Lizzie Borden case. Everybody knows about Lizzie Borden. I always open up by saying this is America's Jack the Ripper case, really. You have Lizzieologists just like you have Ripperologists. So this is a case that is never going to die, and people will always be theorizing about who did what on that. Kind of the game of Clue, if you think about it. People always have a theory on that.
Within like the last 4 minutes, you've presented 2 more topics that you're going to be.
Yeah, I've got a whole list of them. So we're going to go down the rabbit hole if we start talking about all that stuff.
So. Love it. That's what we do.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's speak about this Franklin Evans fellow. How did it first come to be known that he was a dangerous guy?
Well, in 1872, he moved in with his sister, her husband, their daughter, who had been recently widowed, who had a 14-year-old girl. Her name was Georgianna Lovering. He had kind of led an itinerant life as kind of a snake oil salesman, and alternately as a traveling preacher. Pretty shady life. If you read the old articles in the newspaper about him, he'd go from this place to that place, and often mooching off of family. And this was just the latest mooch. He moved in with them because he'd just been bouncing around. Turns out this kind of stunned me. When he eventually was caught and confessed, he said when he first moved in, he tried to seduce the young 14-year-old girl. Now he's 65, and he's the granduncle. They didn't kick him out of the house. I guess it was a different time, because she made it known to her mother that he was doing this. And within a few weeks, he sets this trap, kind of a lure for her, and he ends up killing her, mutilating her severely, committing outrage on her, which in the parlance of the time was what they called rape, and actually hiding a piece of her body in another location. Now, when you hear that, you know it's a serial killer. Usually that kind of fantasy-driven activity is something that immediately my wires go off, that this guy's a serial killer just when I see that. So he ended up coming to prominence when he killed Georgianna in 1872. When he was taken in and questioned, he started to confess to other murders. One went back to 1856, where he had just been kicked out of his house by his first wife, or a second wife, I'm not sure, but he ended up, I think it was Salem, New Hampshire, and he just walked into a house and abducted a little 4-year-old girl, took her out in the woods, and he said he was a botanical doctor too, so he needed to do experiments as a doctor, and he wanted to dissect somebody. So he took that little girl out in the woods and outraged her, but he stopped, and he found that she had a deformity. And in his confession, he said, oh, and then this overwhelming feeling of guilt came over me. And I always say to my audience, I say, this guy was probably a psychopath, so he didn't have anything close to guilt. It was probably because she had a deformity, and that didn't fit his vision. So he still mutilated the body and everything, and buried the body, and it was never found. So it was just chalked up as a little girl that went missing, and nobody ever knew about it for 30 years. How I came across him was I was writing my book, Murder and Mayhem in Boston, and I have a chapter on, it's called Monster in the Woods. And it's about Isabella and John, 2 young kids that were found out in what they call Bussy Woods. Today it's the Arnold Arboretum. I know you guys are based in Boston, right?
The one that's in JP, in Jamaica Plain?
Yeah, right. They were both murdered. She was mutilated. The boy was just stabbed almost to get out of the way, but it went unsolved up until they caught him. And he gave a confession to it, but he retracted it before he was executed. They were looking at several others too. So he only admitted to the Georgianna and the one that I mentioned that happened in 1856. So there's a big gap there. And like I was saying, somebody like that doesn't take a 20-year layover. I think he had been doing it for a long time and was probably very prolific It's just that he never got caught until he was 65 and killed Georgianna.
Wow. And he had traveled around a lot during that period?
Snake oil salesman, botanical doctor, preacher. In his own admission, he had been all over New England. He had been up to Canada. The one that happened in Boston, the Bussy Woods, it was determined that he was preaching as an Adventist preacher in Boston during that time. So he was in the area. Some of the witnesses saw somebody that looked like him down in Bussy Woods during that time. So he was all over New England in different guises. And I think if he was a preacher, I think that would be the perfect cover if he wanted to trick kids. Back then, this is before all the scandals with priests and everything. He's got a collar on. I'm going to trust him.
Yeah, that's really scary. It's a scary bit of imagery to,
it is, yeah.
Yeah, to kind of conceive, and knowing that he's doing it as a bait or a lure for children is horrific.
And the way he lured Georgianna, the one that happened up in Northwood, New Hampshire, where he got caught, very cunning. What he did was, after he was trying to seduce her, they let him stay, but he started setting snares out in the woods for pheasants. And he told Georgianna about it. And she was like, "Oh, I'd like to come out and see him." And he's like, "Oh, no." He made it like she talked him into going out to see the snares. So one day he said to her, he's like, "I have to go do some work for the farmer down the street. Can you check the snares?" And she went out there by herself and didn't know that he was out there waiting for her. So the snares were actually a ruse to trap her.
And you mentioned a couple of times that she had come forward and said that he was making these attempts
advances,
on her.
Right?
These advances,
seduce her, according to the paper.
What was the seduction tactics he was using?
All I got from the paper was that he tried to seduce her. She told her mother, and then it said after that he was more respectful to her. Maybe it's because I'm in the 21st century. I was just dumbstruck. Like, why didn't she just kick him out at that point, the mother? Maybe it was this, respect for elders that they had back then. He's just a kooky old guy, or I don't know how they justified it back then. Oftentimes, what we think today doesn't apply back in those days. So I'm still, did they sequester him in a different part of the house? I don't know.
That was my question too, which was like, was it really that much different? Like you just said, maybe it's because you live nowadays and that is not a thing. But back then,
your granduncle molest your kid.
I don't. Yeah. What year does it have to be to make that all right?
Did they take any precautions, or did in some cases, in these cases, even today, the person that's told about this doesn't believe the kid. That could have been the case. We don't know. Yeah. So but he was allowed to stay. And can you imagine after this all happened, the guilt that the mother must have went through, that she either didn't believe her or didn't do anything about this? Predator was working on her daughter.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Yeah, I think today, it's just a little more widely known that if someone has that idea of being with a very young girl, that this could get worse than just pickup attempts or whatever, this seductive attempts, like this could lead to murder. Now, how was he suspected in the murder? He
was an odd person to begin with. When you read about it, he said that he was with a farmer. I think his name was Dan Hill, working for him. When they checked that out, he wasn't there. So they caught him in a lie. They started to suspect him. And it was a man by the name of Mead, who ran a general store, just took upon himself to walk over to the house and kind of question him. And he had somebody stand guard over him until the next day. And then Sheriff John Drew from the next town over came over, arrested him and brought him to jail, which I found out was his house over in Stafford, which is over the town line. And he began to question Franklin, and he adamantly said he didn't have anything to do with it. And they still haven't found the body yet, but they suspect him. They actually placed him under arrest for murder before they found the body. Things are different. Drew used some tactics that police use today. He lied to him. He said if he told him the truth, he would help him to escape to Canada. That kind of softened him up a little bit. And then the first story was, well, yes, she's not murdered. She's still alive. I gave her over to this farmer in Kingston named Webster, and he wanted her for his wife. So they went down to Kingston. And then Evans is like, oh, maybe it wasn't Kingston. Maybe it was Kensington. They went to Kensington. And then he thought, no, maybe it's Candia. And then by this time, Stafford is just like, this guy is full of it. Let's go back. And he started to work on him even more. Plied him with liquor. I don't think the police can do that today. And eventually he gave it up and he took them to the body. So we know it's not a coerced confession when you go and find the body. They found the body and there were a few men. They brought a doctor along, Dr. Hansen, and they were all, you can imagine, they were just aghast. And they asked him, why he did that. He said that he needed to do this for medical experimentation.
What?
Yeah. He mutilated her. He cut out her private parts and kept that as a trophy. Serial killer. Hid it. After they found the body and saw how mutilated she was strangled, she was stabbed, outraged. It would later be found. They said, take us to that part of the body that you hid. And he saw the glaring looks at these officers like they're going to knock his block off. So he relented and he took them about a mile away. It was her private parts, to say it, were cut out and left under a rock in a nearby mill. By that time, they brought him in. The evidence was pretty strong. He brought him out there and everything. But he was very smug about it. He was like, look how clever I was to catch her. And that's another sign of somebody who's got psychopathy. They have no conscience. They're proud of it. So once he was brought they put him in Exeter jail, New Hampshire, and Stafford was with him the whole time. I don't know if he was continued to ply him with liquor, but he started to tell him about some of these other murders that he did too. But by the time he was executed, he would only admit to, to the Lovering and the Mills case, which is the early one in 1856. Stafford got him to confess to I have the confession right here, to the Bussy Woods murder. And I've seen online that it says he didn't confess to it. But in the papers, I found the confession. He says, well, Frank, what you must tell me right now. Tell me all about it. Were you in Roxbury, Bussy Woods, or were you in Manchester? Tell me about it. Evans, Mr. Drew, I was right there when that boy and girl got killed. Drew, was he stabbed or not? Yes, several times, which is true. Did the girl make much ado? Evans, yes. More than the boy? Evans, yes. Why did she? Don't ask me more, I've told you. Was the act committed before she was killed? You can guess what the act is. And he says, yes, Mr. Drew, I won't tell you anymore. I've told you all about it now. So he confessed to that, but he retracted that before he was executed.
But he was in the area when they went
missing? He was in the area. And in my book, there were various suspects. In my book, I have him as a suspect. And a lot of the law enforcement officials at the time thought he was probably the murderer. That you might think that there weren't too many of these guys running around. In the 1870s, there were several serial killers in New England. Maybe you've heard of Jesse Pomeroy. You haven't heard of him?
No.
Oh, you got to read the Schechter book, Fiend. He was 12 years old. Right over in South Boston. He started off abusing young boys, and then that gradually went to murder. Technically not a serial killer because they caught him after 2. But long story short, he was the youngest serial killer probably. He spent about 54 years in jail, 45 of those years in solitary confinement. He was running around Thomas Piper, the Belfry murderer. That's on the south end of Boston. That's in my book too. And also a Joseph LePage in New Hampshire too. This is all in the 1870s. So when you're talking about the serial killer now, there's more people now. So I don't know what the FBI statistics are, but There's supposed to be a couple hundred of them running around the country at this moment.
I have a question about the gap in time from when he confesses to Georgianna.
Yeah.
And he says that he's got another victim in 1856. There's this gap of time.
Big gap.
Do you think that that was intentional, that he went back to like his first murder?
I think so. Somebody at one of my talks mentioned this too. They said it was right after his wife kicked him out. And you know how they say there's usually some kind of trigger? I think that was his first one. The one in Bussey Woods, the two children were killed in the 1860s. And then he's caught in 1872. So there's this big gap between these. You know, there's the other one that they thought he probably did, one that was over in Maine, where he was there. He was living with the family of the girl that disappeared. He was an Adventist preacher, and they were an Adventist family, and he was there as the guest preacher. So it's likely that one happened too. Her name was Laura Libby, and I think that happened in the 1860s as well.
And that was one that he was suspected of.
Yeah, and he refused to admit that, but he was in the area. Another man was arrested, an Irish guy that was working on the farm, and he got put in jail and died in jail, professing his innocence the whole time. So I think Evans got away with that one too.
Wow. Yeah, I would say it'd be pretty coincidental if he was living there and was a child killer and didn't kill their child who went missing and was murdered. How was she found? Was she mutilated as well?
The townspeople went looking all around for her, and they did find her body. Yes, she was mutilated and raped. So it fits his MO, if you will. And then there was another one right in 1872, right before the Lovering murder, where this doesn't fit the MO, though. It was in Fitchburg, and they found a woman who was unidentifiable. They couldn't figure out who she was, but she was stabbed and mutilated. And they liked him for that one too, but he wouldn't admit to that. And again, a lot of people think, oh, it's not his type, but they don't always stick to the type. You know, like Bundy, he liked the girl with the part down the hair, brown hair, but he killed a little girl too. It's opportunity a lot of the time. If he did that, it might have been just opportunity. This is over a span of 30, 40 years. I think there are a lot more. And I scanned the newspapers for missing girls. You know, with my internet resources, I usually go on the Boston Public Library website where you have access to the newspapers and everything. And I didn't really find out a lot.
Yeah, I was going to ask that if you did your own research and looked for missing girls outside of what you read about law enforcement being interested in. And you didn't find a lot of those? Is it just because maybe they weren't reported?
It could have been, or some of these areas were little towns with their own little newspapers that aren't loaded to the internet. I scanned for missing girl, missing murdered girl. I found a few. There was one in Connecticut here or there, but not a whole lot. I didn't even get up into Canada. I think a lot of them just went missing, and it never made like the Boston Globe or the New York Post or anything like that. And the yellow journalism really hadn't come into the 1880s and 90s. So the sensationalism of it, like this murder, get a little paragraph in some of the papers. That's it.
Well, they should have had podcasts back then.
Yeah. I guess the first wave of true crime wasn't really there yet. I think that came in with the yellow journalism.
Do you know like where he was living during that time in between murders?
He was all over. He was in several locations that's been documented. I know he lived in Salem, Massachusetts, Lowell, I think various locations in New Hampshire, Concord, just the ones that are coming to mind. Stafford. He was from Stafford originally, I guess, which is just over the border from Northwood, and that's southern New Hampshire. But he did admit to being like this itinerant person, perfect for a serial killer, moving around. You're in a town for a few days and then gone. Was up in Canada as well.
And I just got to put my brain back in that time period. He's not hitchhiking. He's not hopping in a car. He's walking and taking like wagons or horses.
Either that or trains.
Trains, yep.
The trains were in, they were all up here in northern New Hampshire by the 1870s, but they were in southern New Hampshire. If he had to go to Canada, I don't know if we had train lines up there yet, but that could have been by horse.
He could at least get far enough where then he could, walk or maybe charter. Is it charter a horse? Rent a horse?
You could hire a horse like a rent-a-car. Yeah. You just go down to the livery and rent a horse. Yep.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
So what happened to Evans after he was arrested?
His trial was really quick. It took about a day. The prosecution took till 3:00 and the defense took a half hour. They had medical alienists examine him from New Hampshire State Hospital, and they said he was sane by the legal definition, sane. He knew what he had done was wrong, obviously, by hiding things and lying about it. And that's always the standard. So he did put in a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. That didn't work. He tried to hang himself during the trial when he was in jail, but that was not successful. And it was really quick, and he was convicted and sentenced to death. The death sentence was carried out within a year. I think he was put to death in 1874 in Concord.
Was that by hanging?
Yes, by hanging at Concord State Prison.
No kidding. The one that's still in Concord?
It's the one that was there before that. Because I was looking for pictures of the gallows, and I was only able to get pictures of the original prison, which I think the new prison was built on that site. But it's interesting, you read the newspapers today, everything's very sanitized. They gave a blow-by-blow description of that execution, how the executioners stretched the ropes out for 3 weeks. And after he was hanged, the neck broke. He died instantly, but they gave his fading heartbeat, like it was 149, and then it went to 129, then up to 89. That's how the newspapers described it, which was kind of fascinating to me. I was like, I didn't even know that you stretched out ropes before you hang somebody.
Interesting and kind of dark, but almost like...
Yes, it is.
It's like the kind of dark you want to hear, though, because this guy was a monster.
He was.
It's like satisfying.
Yeah.
He agreed to give up his body to science.
That was nice of him.
It was donated to Dartmouth University here at Dartmouth, New Hampshire. It was dissected, and from what I can tell, they kept his bones on display for years in their medical museum, which closed down several years ago. So they probably still have his skeleton in a box someplace up there. And there's a picture of his body online, if you want to Google it, laying on a slab. And you can see the neck wounds from the rope and everything.
Fine, I'll Google it.
I don't think his family wanted his body.
So he was living with a relative?
His sister's name was Deborah. Her husband's name was Sylvester. The sister's daughter was Mary Lovering. She was a widow. Her husband fought in the Civil War, survived the war, came back and died. So she was living with her mom, with her young daughter, Georgianna.
I can imagine what that must have been like for that family.
The newspaper said that her mother basically went insane after that. I found that she did remarry years later. She's buried in another town. The two elder ones are buried there in Northwood, but they don't have an idea where Georgianna is. I went out there and I found a little marker near theirs. It's not a footstone or anything. It's got some kind of writing on it. I couldn't figure what it is, but I probably, if I went into the church records, that might be where Georgianna is.
So I did just Google his image on the dissecting table at Dartmouth.
You got that?
Oh, yeah. And it's just about as disturbing as I expected it to be. What were they doing?
It's in a classroom.
Yeah, there's a chalkboard there.
Yeah.
What were they doing to him?
You've heard of the resurrection men, the men that would go dig up corpses for the medical colleges. So they were probably just going to use him as for a class to learn how to dissect or do autopsies on a human.
Did they get a look at his brain? Because I know in modern times they say that there's some differences, oftentimes like brain damage from an early age in serial killers nowadays. But yeah, I'm just curious about the brain. Yeah,
there's no other record other than he was just given over to be dissected. I don't think they were looking to do slivers of his brain or anything like that, like we do now, to see if there was some kind of tumor or something like that. I don't think they were trying to discover why he was like that by his body being dissected.
So he was just there for students to kind of hack at.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And that's why he's in a classroom. I think they took a picture, and that was probably the next thing, was to open him up in front of the classroom and demonstrate. Yeah. It's a medical college. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like morbidly fascinated by this. Do the students know? Are they aware that this is like this horrific person?
I would guess so. Yeah. Here's the famous Franklin Evans, rope burns and all. Yeah. And the other thing is, I know very little about his early childhood, what incidences. We all know there's some kind of trauma in most of these people that, lends to this, but I don't know what happened in his early childhood at all. But he led a wandering life of a miscreant, as they said in the papers.
That's so funny, because usually that's like one of my first questions when we talk about people like this, which is, what kind of background did he have? What kind of childhood did he have? But that didn't even occur to me until you just said that. Even in this telling, he just kind of appears.
Yes, he himself didn't say anything about his upbringing, other than that he spent years wandering around as a preacher, or snake oil salesman, as they called it back then.
What was the life expectancy for a male back then?
I think a lot of people will say, oh, people only lived till about 40 years old back then. I hate when people do that on TV. That's the average age, because there was a high infant mortality rate back then. If you got past 5 or 6, you could live into your 70s, 80s, 90s, just like we do today. The average age was, people died when they were 30. That's not true. A lot of people died when they were young.
Right, so it throws the scale off, because if you're dying at like 4 years old,
right,
it's offsetting the person who's living to like 72.
Yeah, that was true even in the 1600s. And they make it seem like people only lived to 30. But yeah, that's the average age because of the high infant mortality rate.
But people got married a lot earlier, so it makes it seem like the life was more condensed back then.
Right. They did get married earlier. They had more kids, that's for sure. A lot of them were farmers, and it was like labor on the farm. And when we started getting into the industrial age, I think the birth rate started to go down. And
when they were looking into Evans and the other victims that he claimed to killed, what type of forensics were involved? Did they have like an active forensic investigation into other victims aside from the one 1856?
They found a knife. It had blood on it. No DNA. I know in the Lizzie Borden case, they were able to determine that when they found that hatchet, there was blood on it, but they determined it was animal blood. They were able to tell by the size of the corpuscles whether it was animal blood or human blood. And I think that was the extent of it. I don't even think they had blood typing back then. The confession was it, that he brought them to the body. I don't even know if they did a full autopsy. They had a coroner's jury back then that would basically be laymen, not even a doctor, and they just determined the cause of death. And they obviously knew what that was just by looking at the body. She had ligature marks, stab wounds. I guess they could tell if somebody had been sexually attacked back then. So they were able to tell that from the so-called autopsy. I don't even know if it was an autopsy like we think of today.
How successful, I guess, was he as a preacher? Did he do a lot of that, or was it just to murder little girls?
That's scant evidence, too. There was one story, and I think it was probably the same time he was in Boston. I guess he was very glib, and he raised a lot of money. I think he would come to different places and raise money for whatever cause. Cause happened to be him, because down in Boston, he gave this wonderful sermon. They gave him a lot of money. Then they found out he was out buying expensive pipes and clothes and stuff like that, and they shut him down, and they disassociated themselves with him at that point. So I don't know when he would go into a town how long he would last before they figured out what he was, but in Boston they found out pretty quickly. And this is about the same time as the Bussy Woods murders. So
do you think he felt like he needed to leave that area?
Yeah. Even the newspapers said wherever he went, he left a bad reputation. So that would be consistent with what I've just said, that he kind of wore out his welcome pretty quickly. And again, this is the days before the internet, the telephone. And I'm sure they didn't telegraph stuff like this. He could just go from town to town and he'd start all over again and nobody would know who he was.
Yeah, did he ever change his appearance or anything, or he just kind of changed his profession?
Variously, he'd be like selling some concoction, like I said, a snake oil salesman or itinerant preacher. He styled himself as so-called botanical physician, and he would sell that concoction, whatever he had. And it's funny, the newspapers refer to it. He would normally go to places where there were ignorant people, small farming towns, and he'd come into town and sell his concoction, saying it cured everything, and then he'd be gone the next day. So that seems to be his life. I don't know if he stopped doing that and started being a preacher, or if he did that interchangeably. The newspapers, the records don't tell us that. The thing is, a lot of people don't even know about it. I was giving this talk right around the corner from Northwood, and people were like, I never knew about this. It's like one of those cases that just kind of slipped under and nobody knows about it. I've looked at it and I'm like, is there enough for a book here? But there's so many missing things, and you'd really have to go and dig, go out to places and look through records and courtrooms and things like that to do a book on this.
Well, if anyone can do it, I think it's you. Are you planning another book?
I've thought about different things, and I'm busy with doing the lectures and everything. I have ideas, but I'm like, well, would anybody really be interested in that? I don't know. But like I said, for myself, writing's pretty hard. Now you have AI. I guess you could just plug in what you wanted to write.
Oh, God, don't do that.
I know. That's what you're up against. Should I?
I like the idea of the presentations because you're real and you're there, and
right.
It gives a lot more texture to the story.
And the way I do it is I start out with a script, and after I've done it a few times, I don't need the script anymore, and I just go off the top of my head. I do one on the Bonnie and Clyde case. We went out there and photographed everything. We talked to people and all that, and that's a great talk. I started out with my little script, and after you do it a few times, it becomes like a little play. And, you get the parts where people, this is going to make people laugh, and you get these little lines and everything. So right now, the Northwoods one, I've done a few times, and it's starting to feel good now where, now I've got it. Whereas when you first started out, you got your head buried in your notes. But most of these ones that I've done over the years, they're all kind of memorized.
Where can folks go to check out where you're going to be presenting next?
You could go to daleyhistory.com. That's DALEY history.com. And that's got all my presentations that are coming up. I think you guys I have a calendar. It tells where I am, and usually it's libraries, historical societies, things of that nature.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for spending some time with us here today on this
Thank
Memorial
you for having
Day. Yeah, we appreciate you joining us and spending some time with us here. We definitely would love to have you back, talk about some more of these mysteries. Yeah.
Oh, sure. I'd love to. That'd be great.